What if the most dangerous moment in a conflict wasn't when missiles were flying, but when they suddenly stopped? For the first time in several days, the Strait of Hormuz woke to an unusual silence. No reports of new missile launches. No fresh drone attacks dominating headlines. No emergency statements warning of immediate retaliation. After days of military exchanges that had pushed one of the world's most important shipping corridors back into the international spotlight, the region experienced something it had not seen for nearly a week. A pause. Too many observers that sounded like good news. To military planners, it raised an entirely different question. What changed? Because in modern conflicts, silence can mean very different things. Either both sides are stepping away from confrontation, or both sides are preparing for what comes next. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. A significant portion of globally traded crude oil passes through this narrow channel every day, linking Gulf energy producers with markets across Asia, Europe, and beyond. Even limited disruptions can ripple across global supply chains, influence fuel prices, raise shipping insurance costs, and unsettle financial markets. That reality explains why every incident in these waters attracts worldwide attention. During the previous several days, commercial vessels navigating the strait faced renewed security concerns as reports emerged of attacks involving unmanned systems and military responses targeting infrastructure connected to regional tensions. The exchanges prompted governments, shipping companies, and insurers to reassess operational risks throughout the Gulf. Then, almost as suddenly as the cycle of escalation accelerated, it paused. Maritime security specialists monitoring the region described the sudden reduction in military activity as a welcome development, but few considered it a lasting resolution. Instead, many viewed it as something far more familiar. A temporary operational pause. Not peace. Simply an interruption. According to analysts who follow shipping activity around the clock, the absence of new strikes does not necessarily indicate that the underlying disputes have been resolved. Rather, it may reflect a moment in which military pressure and diplomatic engagement are occurring simultaneously. That distinction is important, because while the exchange of fire appeared to slow, diplomatic channels remained active behind the scenes. Delegations from both Washington and Tehran were expected to continue indirect discussions through regional mediators, with Qatar once again serving as one of the primary venues for communication. Those meetings did not emerge overnight. For weeks, intermediaries had continued facilitating contacts, even while military operations unfolded elsewhere in the region. This reflects a pattern increasingly common in modern crises. Military operations and diplomacy no longer occur separately. They often happen at exactly the same time. One applies pressure. The other attempts to manage its consequences. Neither automatically replaces the other. Yet beneath this temporary calm, none of the major strategic disagreements have actually disappeared. Questions surrounding maritime security, freedom of navigation, regional military deployments, and broader security arrangements remain unresolved. Those issues continue to shape every decision made by governments operating around the Persian Gulf. For commercial shipping matters as much as any individual military incident. Shipping companies must decide which routes remain acceptable. Insurance providers continually adjust risk assessments. Navies expand patrols to reassure international commerce. Energy markets respond not only to confirmed attacks but also to the possibility that another disruption could occur with little warning. This constant balancing act has become one of the defining characteristics of the Strait of Hormuz. Military activity never fully disappears. Diplomatic negotiations never fully stop. Instead, both evolve together. That dynamic helps explain why many governments remain cautious despite the recent reduction in visible military exchanges. The absence of explosions does not automatically restore confidence. Confidence returns only when predictability returns. At the moment, predictability remains in short supply. Another factor complicating the situation is the broader regional security environment. The issues surrounding the strait cannot be viewed in isolation. Developments elsewhere in the Middle East continue influencing decisions made by multiple governments, creating overlapping security calculations that extend well beyond maritime navigation itself. As a result, a pause in one theater does not necessarily reduce tensions across the entire region. Military planners understand this well. They rarely assume that quiet conditions will last indefinitely. Instead, they use quieter periods to reposition assets, collect intelligence, strengthen logistics, and evaluate possible future scenarios. Diplomats use the same periods to test whether negotiations can produce enough progress to prevent another cycle of escalation, whether those two efforts reinforce each other, or simply delay another confrontation, remains uncertain. For now, analysts generally describe the current situation using remarkably similar language: fragile, manageable, but capable of changing very quickly. That assessment reflects not pessimism but experience. The Strait of Hormuz has repeatedly demonstrated that periods of calm can be interrupted by sudden incidents involving commercial vessels, military patrols, or regional proxy forces. Each new event then forces governments to recalculate their responses all over again. This is why the recent silence should not automatically be interpreted as the conclusion of the crisis. It may simply represent another phase within it. The coming diplomatic discussions, therefore, carry significant swell beyond the negotiating table. Their outcome will influence military planning, commercial shipping, energy markets, and regional stability simultaneously. If meaningful progress emerges, confidence throughout the Gulf could gradually improve. If negotiations stall, military deployments already positioned throughout the region remain fully capable of responding to renewed tensions. For now, the Strait of Hormuz is quieter than it was only days ago, but quiet should never be confused with certainty. Sometimes the most consequential moments in international security are not defined by explosions. They are defined by the decisions being made while no one is firing at all. Yet beneath the diplomatic calendar lies another reality that cannot be ignored. Even as negotiations continue, the fundamental disagreement remains unchanged. Who ultimately guarantees security inside one of the world's most important maritime corridors? Iran has consistently argued that it should play the leading role in managing traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, describing regional security as a matter best handled by countries within the Gulf itself. The United States and many of its partners take a different position. From Washington's perspective, the strait is an international waterway whose uninterrupted access must remain protected under international maritime principles, regardless of political disputes elsewhere in the region. Those two visions are difficult to reconcile, because they are not simply competing diplomatic statements. They represent two entirely different concepts of maritime security. One emphasizes regional authority. The other emphasizes international freedom of navigation. As long as both interpretations coexist, every military deployment, every naval patrol, and every commercial transit through the strait carries political significance beyond its immediate purpose. That reality has become increasingly visible over recent months. Commercial shipping companies have adjusted routes. Regional governments have expanded maritime coordination. International naval forces continue surveillance operations designed to reassure commercial traffic while maintaining awareness of rapidly changing conditions. None of these measures suggest that conflict is inevitable. Instead, they illustrate how modern deterrence functions. Military forces remain present not necessarily because combat is expected tomorrow, but because their presence reduces the chances that miscalculation occurs today. At the same time, regional diplomacy continues operating on multiple levels. Public statements often attract the greatest attention, yet experience understand that many of the most important conversations occur privately. Telephone calls, indirect messages, third-party mediation, technical discussions involving maritime safety. None of these generate dramatic headlines, but together they often determine whether crises expand or gradually stabilize. That explains why periods of military tension frequently coincide with active diplomatic engagement rather than replacing it. Both tracks serve different purposes. Military deployments shape calculations. Diplomatic negotiations test whether those calculations can eventually produce compromise. Neither side wants to appear weak. Neither side wants to lose leverage before negotiations begin. As a result, both often continue demonstrating military capability while simultaneously signaling willingness to continue talking. This pattern has appeared repeatedly throughout recent regional crises. It may appear contradictory. In practice, it has become increasingly common. For commercial shipping, however, strategic theory offers little comfort. Merchant crews navigating these waters remain primarily concerned with operational safety. Insurance providers evaluate changing threat levels. Port authorities monitor shipping schedules. Energy companies assess supply reliability. Every additional uncertainty influences commercial decisions that ultimately extend far beyond the Middle East itself. The Strait of Hormuz therefore represents far more than a military flashpoint. It has become an economic pressure point whose stability affects consumers worldwide. A prolonged disruption would reach far beyond the Gulf. Manufacturing, transportation, energy markets, financial confidence, all remain connected to the uninterrupted movement of cargo through this narrow passage. That explains why so many governments continue investing diplomatic effort into preventing further escalation. The costs of failure would not remain regional. They would become global. Still, optimism remains cautious. Security specialists increasingly describe the current environment using similar language: stable enough for commerce to continue, unstable enough that conditions could change quickly. That assessment reflects the reality facing decision-makers today. No major participant appears eager for a broader conflict. Yet none appears fully prepared to abandon its core strategic objectives either. That combination creates an environment where limited incidents remain possible, even while larger escalation is actively avoided. History suggests this pattern is not unusual. Periods of reduced tension often provide opportunities for diplomacy. Sometimes those opportunities produce lasting agreements. Sometimes they merely postpone the next crisis. Determining which outcome emerges usually depends less on public speeches than on quiet negotiations conducted away from television cameras. For now, those conversations continue. The coming discussions may help reduce misunderstandings, establish practical mechanisms for maritime safety, and preserve commercial navigation through one of the world's busiest energy corridors. Or they may simply create another temporary pause before long-standing disagreements reappear. No analyst can answer that question with certainty. What is clear is that today's quiet should not be interpreted as proof that every underlying dispute has disappeared. The strategic competition remains. The military deployments remain. The diplomatic contacts remain. Each continues influencing the others. Perhaps that is the defining characteristic of modern geopolitical competition. Wars are no longer measured only by the battles that occur. They are increasingly shaped by the periods between them. The pauses, the negotiations, the calculations, the efforts to prevent the next escalation while preparing for the possibility that prevention fails. For the moment, the Strait of Hormuz remains open. Commercial traffic continues moving. Diplomats continue talking. Naval forces continue watching. Whether this period becomes the foundation for greater stability, or simply another brief chapter in a longer cycle of regional tension, is a question that has not yet been answered. And until it is, the silence over the strait should not be mistaken for certainty. It should be understood for what it truly is. A moment of strategic pause in one of the world's most closely watched waterways, where diplomacy and deterrence continue advancing side by side, each attempting to shape what happens next.